Welcome, everybody. Joe Tarnowski with ECRM here, and I have with me today Wendy Saltzman, who's the CEO of Philly Power Media. Now, Wendy is a three-time Emmy Award winning journalist and has been in the television industry for 23 years, so she knows a thing or two about being on camera. And that's what we're going to discuss today, is how to put your best foot forward when it comes to engaging people in a virtual setting. So, Wendy, thank you so much for joining us. And to begin, can you give us a little background on your history and Philly Power Media?
Absolutely. Well, first of all, thanks for having me. I'm very happy to be here with you. And I love the topic that we're talking about because I'm so passionate about it. So I was on TV. I was a television news broadcaster for 23 years, and I was primarily an investigative reporter during that time. I won 3 Emmys for the work that I did. You can see, I guess, 2 there. There's what they're going, but 3 Emmys for the work that I did. And I was recruited to launch investigative teams at 3 different stations across the country. And then a couple of years back, after being diagnosed with and overcoming breast cancer, I launched my own company called Philly Power Media. And what we do is we coach people. We coach them to be on camera for presentations, media interviews, public speaking events. And now a large part of our business has transitioned and pivoted to virtual presenting. Because as you know, in the world with what you're doing now and how you've had to change your conferences to be virtual conferences, we want to help people become more confident and powerful communicators virtually so that they can really tackle any obstacles they have and put their best foot forward.
So now that we are living in a virtual world pretty much, what are some of the challenges or just high level challenges that you see people having in adapting to it? People who are used to speaking maybe in public or presenting in public, but now all of a sudden we're on screens.
Well, let's face it, the first thing is you're no longer talking to a human. So the one thing that I think most people are comfortable with is if you were sitting in a room and you were sitting across from one person, then you could have that conversation easily. Obviously, the larger that group gets, the more uncomfortable people get, and public speaking is the number one fear in America. And then adding to that now we're just all talking to this little thing right here, just a camera at the top of a computer, and that's an inanimate object. So that isn't something that can shake its head when you're doing something good. Most of the time people are muted, so you really can't hear if there are laughs or feedback. So for a lot of people, it's just really hard to transition from the energy you get when you're speaking in a room and the feedback that you get from people to all of a sudden having to speak to a camera and yet maintain that same level of energy and enthusiasm and excitement to sell their products or themselves.
And you know, speaking of energy, I really noticed that when I was moderating a virtual roundtable, because normally you have 8 to 10 people sitting around you, you have that energy, you can easily see their gestures, them rolling their eyes, or you just feel that energy, and it's easier to keep the conversation going. I found it was a lot more work in a virtual setting because, one, I had to look more closely at their faces, and I had to kind of be a lot more proactive in moderating the rhythm of the discussion as opposed to an in-person setting.
Well, and one of the things you can even see here in what we're doing is we have the ability, since it's just 2 of us, to speak back and forth and have a conversation and questions. But the majority of the time when you have numerous people on a call, those other people are muted. So you don't have that back and forth conversation. So for a lot of people, that makes it a lot more difficult to show their personality and to be personable on camera and in this virtual setting than it would be if you had people in person in front of you.
Yep. Plus you have the converse happens too, where they're all talking over each other because they're not recognizing the visual cues that would, like someone's stopping their thought and concluding a thought. So you end up having everybody talking at once.
And then add on top of that the virtual aspect, I mean, the technology that comes with it. So some people, you may not be able to hear them very well because their audio isn't great or their video setup isn't great. And some people just aren't even comfortable with the technology. So there are just a lot of added factors that people need to overcome now that we've moved to the virtual world. But the good thing about it is once you get comfortable with it and get excited with it, there's no turning back. I think you and I both have turned to virtual and it's like, this is amazing. And so that's really what I work with my clients on, is so that they can feel super comfortable and walk away feeling like, wow, you know what, it would have been great to be in front of a group, but I feel like I did just as good. And you need to gain that level of comfort, because the bottom line is this is the way we're going to be doing business for a while. I know a lot of companies, and your group may be the same, that they've canceled all in-person networking through March or further next year. And with that being the case, people have to be able to work within these parameters and be good at it.
Yep, exactly. Ours, we're staying virtual, I think, for the first half of next year. And yeah, a lot of other companies were hearing the same thing. So, and that's a great segue into, the first topic. So now we're going to get into the nuts and bolts of some of these best practices, and that's framing up the space, right? This whole space, right? Now we're in a world where I explain to presenters that suppliers who are presenting to buyers, it's like your whole world in their eyes is what's in this box. So tell us, what is the most important thing to consider, or things to consider about framing up the space?
Sure, and I'm going to unplug my computer here for a second to show you. The first thing is, and the most important thing is you, right? You're the most important thing in that box. And so when I talk about framing, one of the mistakes I see being made most often is that people are putting themselves in front of, and I've got a little light I'm using over here, so I'm going to even turn this off to try to show you better. But as people are putting themselves in front of windows, and what happened there?
You're gone. You're a silhouette.
You can't see me.
Nope.
Right? So a lot of people think, oh, well, my window is the best place for me to be. It's the most, attractive background that I have. And they're not recognizing, or maybe sometimes they just don't care. But the bottom line is that people just can't see them. And that becomes really distracting. It's just like, you want to see somebody's eyes to see if you can trust them. You want to make sure that people can see you. So make sure that when you look at framing, the first thing is to look at your lighting. So use natural light to your advantage. Even if I just have this filler one knowing we were doing this interview. But even without this, I make sure that I have that light from my window. It's here to shine on my face. And that way it's lighting up my face. So you want natural light to be in front of you and not behind you. So that's the most important thing. The second thing is consider your background. What's in your background? You want to look at that. Is it cluttered? Stay out of a space where everybody's going to be walking by. A lot of us have really nice kitchens or living rooms, but if your kids are walking up and down the stairs during that, I was doing an interview while I was filling in with NBC 10 during COVID, and somebody had their daughter in a nightshirt walking by, and that can be very distracting, and that's not the kind of image you want to portray. So make sure that you find a spot in the house that is quiet. And we all know we're working from home. I've got my dog barking in another room right now, but try to find a quiet space. Lastly, make sure that I prefer not to have white walls. If you don't have a white wall, that looks a lot better. I love your background, but take a second to look at your background and make sure that it's not really cluttered. And then it's a representation of who you are and your professionalism.
Okay, and I think on one of your other videos, you mentioned not too many distracting things where they're going to be pay attention to, ooh, that's a cool painting, or look at that, instead of looking at you.
Absolutely, yeah. So I also, when it comes to framing, so what you were talking about was in that video, I said, ideally for framing, I like this space where you're kind of seeing me here. So people can see your hands when you're talking and they can see your face, but it's not this close to your face. I've seen some of those, and that's kind of weird and distracting, right? Or if it's so super far away, if you've got a lot of pictures and whatnot, knickknacks in the background, people are going to be busy staring at those knickknacks instead of staring at you.
Mm-hmm. And I've seen that. And I try to get a little bit further away. I probably should get a little bit further away. I tend to gesture higher to kind of make up for it. But yeah, I've seen a variety. I've definitely seen the witness protection look by people sitting in front of an open, a window with the shades open. But also the, when they're just too far back. I've also seen people do groups where it's like 2 or 3 people. And in some cases, it worked pretty well because the way that it was set up was like a talk show. It was 2 people sitting next to each other, podcast mic in the middle. They had, 3 box lights. I mean, so you could see them clearly and it was fine. But then others I've seen like sitting at the end of a conference room table where they were way further back and it was almost too distant.
Now, one of the other things that I want to talk about in your world is, although this to me is ideal framing for the kind of stuff that we're doing, if people have stuff they're showing, I want them to feel comfortable sitting further away. So that if I was going to be showing you, a product or something, feel free to make sure that you have that in a position where it can be in the frame. Mm-hmm. You can also stand up. A lot of people present a lot better when they're standing up. So don't feel completely constrained by this idea that you have to be in a box. So it really depends on what you're doing. If you need to be showing something, then you can widen that shot a little bit. But, for our purposes and most purposes, this is really going to be the kind of framing that I think is going to be best to make sure that people are focusing on you.
Cool. Well, what about camera angles? What camera angles do you recommend? For me, it's a eye level or a little bit higher.
Yeah, absolutely. So that's a great point. So eye level. So here is what here's what I've got. I have my computer right now propped up on a bunch of folders because otherwise it would be sitting low. And if you see cameras like this, what are you seeing? Seeing
underneath, yeah.
Now, as women, we don't really love that shot, right? That's not real attractive. So what you want to do is make sure that your camera is eye level, and you can, improvise, be impromptu, pick things in your house like me, in terms of just getting folders and putting your camera up in that folder. But absolutely, my camera right now is eye level with me, and that's the way that it's going to look best. As you said, if you slightly want to tilt down, that can look really good as well. But just make sure that your camera isn't lower and shooting up. It's just not a good look for anyone.
Well, I find it adds to the chin. It adds chins if you do that.
Yes, we don't want that.
And you'd laugh if you saw what I have my computer on. It's a milk crate.
Okay, well, see, that's what I'm saying.
It's the perfect height.
Whatever you have that's in the house, you can find something that you can put your computer up on that's just going to make it look better. So what we're talking about right now is, take a second to stop and think about what the shot looks like. So, 5 minutes before you go on, however many minutes, you can just stop and look. Hey, how does this look first?
And we do give them on our platform, we give them a preview window so that they can kind of check that out before their meetings start. So that's a good tip for them. Speaking of cameras, where do you look? When do you look at the camera? I know, for me, this is always a tough thing because on the one hand, at our meetings, you have suppliers and maybe a couple of buyers, and you want to look at them to see what their facial expressions are. But like if I move a little closer, right, now I'm looking at the camera, but now I'm looking at you. So when I'm looking at you on my end, it doesn't look like I'm looking at you on your end. So how do you when's the best time to look at each spot? Or how often should you vary it?
So I feel like when you're talking, my job is to be looking at you. But when I'm talking, it's okay if I'm looking at you, in other words. But I coach my clients to really minimize the screen. And so like for me, I've got you kind of minimized up underneath my camera, because what you really want is to be looking right there at that camera. It's the same thing as if you were face to face, that eye contact is so important. And if you're trying to sell yourself or convince somebody of something, what they want to know is that they're connecting with you. And that's the great thing about video, as opposed to being on a telephone or sending an email, is these kind of video conferences allow a personal connection with the people that you're talking to. But truly to connect, you do that through the eyes. And so look at your camera as much as possible, especially if you're making a pitch where you don't have a lot of interaction with other people. You need to be looking directly into that camera for people to feel like you're talking to them. If you're looking down, and this is the mistake I see is people are looking down and they're reading. What they're doing is they're reading their slides or they're reading their proposal, and that seems extremely impersonal, and the audience is going to tune out.
So maybe if they have, let's say they have a couple of slides, and we only recommend they have 2 or 3 slides at the most, but maybe they can stick them on the wall behind the camera so that when they're sneaking a look at them, it's not as obvious as, say, I'm reading my notes over here.
So I always say you really should have message points. Never read. Never read. You should know your content well enough that if you want to make sure, I want to hit on points A, B, and C, that you can have points A, B, and C. And whether those are just on a post on your computer, or more, even better if they're in your head, that you have those message points. But the rest of the content, you should know well enough that you should not have to read. And, that's all about practice, practice, practice. And the more you practice, the more successful you are going to be.
Actually, that's a great point. I mean, by the time they're having meetings with buyers, they should know their presentation inside out anyway. So enough to just, what do they call it in your field, vamp?
Yeah, absolutely. Right. Yeah.
So cool. Smiling, you do a lot of it, and talk about the importance of that and what that kind of delivers.
This is my favorite tip. It is that you need to smile. So when you smile, you can actually hear it in your voice. So I want our listeners and viewers at home to try this. So if you don't smile, this is what your voice sounds like. And, again, try it at home and you can see this is what your voice is going to sound like. But the minute you smile, you can hear that positivity in the person's voice. So you always want to be smiling. Not only does that make you more engaging, so people are going to want to do business with people they like. Do they want to sit across from you? Do you seem like a nice person? So when you smile, it also brings the audience in and makes them engaged with you, and it makes you more likable, but you can also hear it in your voice. So my advice is, even if you're on the telephone and people can't see your face, you should be smiling anyways, because people will know, because they will hear it.
In fact, a lot of telemarketing companies used to tell people to smile when they were on the phone because of that exact fact. And actually, I'm going to jump one point ahead. The smiling, what I noticed when you didn't smile and you did start smiling, is it was also like a little clearer, like the enunciation. And I know you talked a little bit about mumbling, and that is something. It's funny because that I have a true blue-collar New York accent, and I tend to slur my words. And I was thinking about it when you were talking about opening your mouth wider when you speak, and it definitely helps. And there's some words that I'm going to avoid anyway, just because they do not sound well coming out of my mouth, or I will trip over them. But talk a little bit about mumbling and how to avoid it.
Absolutely. So you saw my tip, but I know a lot of the listeners here may not. But a lot of people, especially as you said, with accents, can find themselves mumbling. Also, when people are really shy or they're not sure about themselves, it's like they want to keep the words inside their mouth. And so they mumble. Like if they aren't super comfortable, they'll mumble because they don't want to talk. So what you need to do to keep yourself from mumbling is to make sure you open your mouth. And so, Joe, I'm going to make you do this with me so I don't look like an idiot here all on my own. But we're going to do a quick exercise to open your mouth. So the first thing I want you to do is open your mouth as wide as you can. So, okay, the next thing is open your mouth and stick your tongue out. Okay, let's do the first one again. And then the next one.
Oh, wait, I jumped ahead.
It's okay, but the goal there is if you're prone to mumbling, exercise your mouth. Remember, your mouth is like a muscle. And for all of our sports fans out there right now watching football and other sports, you need to exercise your mouth. And that's one way to prepare your mouth, to make sure that you're opening your mouth. The other thing is you can look in the mirror and see if you can see your teeth when you speak. Because if you can, that means you're opening your mouth enough. And that's going to help you so that it doesn't sound like you're mumbling. Of course, we have all sorts of tips and tricks we can teach people when they do have accents and they're trying to get away from that. I was a Midwesterner. I've gone through hours and hours of coaching to get rid of some parts of my accent. But there are other tips and tricks, but the biggest thing is really just to open your mouth to be clear so people can hear you.
That's great. So I think an exercise that some people should do is just, on the supplier side, if they're doing a presentation, do their presentation on Zoom by themselves and record it, and then just watch and see and keep adjusting and refining it as they do it.
No doubt. I mean, anytime I give a presentation, I've practiced it at least 5 times from start to finish before I go give that presentation. And I would highly encourage people to do that. And the best way is truly to record it and watch it back. It's amazing when we do our coaching sessions with people, both face-to-face and virtually, we record things and we show them to them, because a lot of people have no idea some of the behaviors and things they do until they see it on camera. Mm-hmm. Another thing I do is I'll stand up in front of a mirror and I'll watch myself so that, especially if I'm going to stand and give a presentation, so that I can look at my body language.
Sometimes it's just as simple as that. Practice, practice, practice. And I think a lot of people don't realize, if you see a professional speaker or somebody gives a TED talk, they don't realize how many hundreds of times people actually rehearse those. I mean, if you've read any article about somebody's process when they were getting ready, they put a lot of work into it. It's not like you just go and wing it with a couple of notes. It's over and over, refining and refining and refining till they actually get it right.
And Joe, that's such a great point. And that's, the reason I'm here talking to you today, because I know that a lot of the people you are working with, they have great products and they're going out there to pitch those products to people. But if they don't seem confident when they're doing that, or they can't get their point across and they're flubbing up their presentation, then they may miss their chance at an amazing opportunity just because they didn't take the time and they didn't take the effort to prepare properly, get the proper coaching that they need to make sure that they can really nail it every single time that they're making that pitch and presentation.
Yep, and it's hard for the passion to come through if your brain is busy trying to remember this and that and this and that. But if you have it down, then your kind of natural passion about your product, your company, what you're doing with it, that'll actually come through.
100%. Agree with you all the way.
Great. Well, last topic, gestures. As I mentioned before, because of where I am on my screen, I've actually brought my gestures up a little bit higher. What are your recommendations as far as gestures in a virtual world?
So amazingly, I find that the majority of my clients, I need to give them permission to gesture. So they have been told or taught to keep their hands by their sides. Now, I work with a lot of attorneys as well, and that's one of the things that somewhere along the way, people were told not to use their hands. But that is wrong. You need to gesture when you speak. Again, I want you to think if you were sitting across from me and we were having coffee, you would be using your hands to gesture. Now, the way, and gestures take your viewers or listeners on a visual journey with you. So if I were to say, well, I started here, went to here, and this is where my company is in terms of profits. Or if I say I traveled here, went there, I'm taking you with my hands and gestures on a visual journey. And our brains actually process what we see before they process the words that we hear. Not just that, but when you gesture, when you speak, it helps with the natural cadence of your voice. So people who are more prone to be monotone, a lot of the time, and that's another thing people can practice. If you've got your hands by your side and you're trying to seem really animated, it's really hard. Like even there, it's like my body's like bumping around, it's really hard when you're excited to sit there with your arms by your side. And likewise, when you allow yourself to gesture, it's going to help you sound more natural. It's going to help you express and punctuate important words in a sentence and to pause when necessary. And pauses for effect can be extremely powerful. So what I tell people is gesture. I don't want your gestures up here. And, Joe, you say you move your gestures up. I'd be careful about like moving them up too much. Sometimes people don't need to see your gestures, even if they can see kind of in this range. But just, kind of in the natural range. I don't want your hands out here, but just in a natural range. And I think that that is the most powerful thing that people can do to change their cadence and their voice inflection if they're having a problem with being monotone, is just to try that one simple trick.
I 100% agree, because if you tied my hands to my sides, I wouldn't be able to speak. Mm-hmm. Even if I'm on a phone call, I'm gesturing. I'm doing something. I have to move because it's just, to me, it's a physical thing. It's you want to have that energy. I'm a big believer. You have to have energy in what you do. It comes through. And if you're not really putting your body into it, you're going to feel it. You're going to hear it.
Absolutely. And you're 100%. It's about passion, right? And so what we want to teach people and coach people is how to be passionate about what they're talking about, whether they're selling a product, they're giving a speech. In every way, what they're actually doing is selling themselves. And so they need to be passionate about what they're selling. And I think it's hard to be passionate if you aren't moving your hands.
Absolutely. So any final thoughts?
I think that when we talk about virtually presenting, the biggest challenge truly is how do we engage the audience? When people are speaking in public, before this virtual thing became so popular, 28% of people admitted they were texting when people were presenting, 27% were searching the internet, 19% of people said that they checked their email, and 17% of people admitted to sleeping while someone was presenting. Now, you've got to think about how much more of a challenge that is in this day and age during virtual presenting, because people are sitting right in front of their computers. So it's much easier for them to be checking their email or the internet. So your job as a presenter is to be engaging and to engage that audience. And I would just say, I appreciate you having me here. I hope we've given some people really useful tips. And for any of the people that you work with or that see this, that would like one-on-one coaching, we do virtual coaching, and it's amazing how effective it can be. And I think it's so important that people really think about the importance of selling themselves now virtually, because this is going to be the future. Even when we start having things in person, there is going to be a whole realm that's been opened up by what we're doing now, where I don't think people are going to go back. So you need to master this skill set now.
Same with us. We're not going to be fully in person. We're going to have a mix of virtual and in person, because some people just love it too much. There are some buyers that they're getting so much more work done because they don't have the time traveling and all that. So, we're going to follow their lead and kind of have a blend moving forward. So great. So thank you for all of that. How can people get in touch with you if they're interested?
Sure. So I'm on every social media platform that there is. Maybe not Pinterest though, but you can find me on the web at phillypowermedia.com or email me at wendy@phillypowermedia.com. On Facebook and LinkedIn and Twitter and Instagram, every week I put out a tip of the day. So those are my tips, my public speaking and marketing tips that are going to give you little free tidbits every single week. So please make sure that you go follow me on social media as well.
Thank you so much. I do plan on incorporating some of this into my own engagement on virtual meetings. So, and I'm sure our audience is going to get a lot out of this. So thanks again.
It is my pleasure. Thank you so much for having me today.